Martial law has been declared in more parts of Burma as the military junta intensifies its crackdown following the February 1st coup. According to one Burmese group, at least 217 protesters have been killed. Over 2,000 have been arrested or detained since the coup began. On Sunday, at least 38 people were killed in the deadliest day of political violence so far. But protests are continuing across the country.
The military announced martial law, which means they have declared war, and it gave them authority to access people's properties or do whatever they want. Building these barricades, it protects us to some extent, and it is the only type of security we can do.
The military is also cracking down on communications. Much of Burma is under an internet blackout, and independent newspapers have stopped publishing. Last week, all 15 nations of the UN Security Council issued a joint statement condemning the, quote, violence against peaceful protesters, including against women, youth, and children. China and Russia back the UN statement. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has accused the military of torturing prisoners.
At least 5 deaths in custody have occurred in recent weeks, and at least 2 victims' bodies have shown signs of severe physical abuse, indicating that they were tortured. We are deeply disturbed that the crackdown continues to intensify, and we again call on the military to stop killing and detaining protesters.
Despite the international criticism, the Burmese military is intensifying its grip on power. Earlier today, additional charges were filed against the ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Meanwhile, Burma's UN ambassador, Chow Mo-Toon, has been charged with treason following his remarks last month at the UN condemning the coup. We go now to Geneva, Switzerland, where we're joined by Wai Hnin. She's a Burmese human rights activist with Burma Campaign UK. She's the daughter of a longtime Burmese dissident who's the former student leader and political prisoner who's been detained since the start of the coup. We welcome you to Democracy Now!, Wai Hnin. Thank you so much for joining us. Explain what's happening on the ground, the massive assault on protesters, and also what's happening with your father, a well-known now political prisoner.
Thank you so much for having me on your program. It's been 46 days since the coup took over my country, Burma. And every day people are protesting on the streets, and every day they're being killed by the police and special forces. Like you mentioned, now we have over 2,200 political prisoners inside the prison, and some of them we have no idea where they're being detained. Some of them simply disappeared because they have no contacts with family members, and their family members haven't been told their condition or their whereabouts. And protesters keep coming out on the street calling for democracy and human rights, because we don't want to live under another military dictatorship. They are risking arrest, and they know they will be shot when they go out on the street, but they're still doing it. But the military is using, increased violence against the peaceful protesters, and all the footages we've seen on the ground is really heartbreaking. And regarding my dad, he was arrested on the first day of coup on 1st of February. And since then, we have no idea where he is being detained or his whereabouts. So we are very worried about his condition as well, and also it's very hard to see, this is his 3rd arrest. So it's very hard to see him being back in prison again.
And Wai Hnin, although, as you said, it's very difficult to know what the situation is of political prisoners, there have been reports from human rights groups that officials from Aung San Suu Kyi's party have been badly tortured in prison, and 2 have died in custody. Could you talk about that?
Yes, so they are arresting NLD members, and they are arresting supporters of NLD, National League for Democracy party as well. So there are we have a lot of reports coming out from the country saying if they can't find the person that they want to arrest, they are arresting family members. Sometimes that can be elderly moms, or that can be daughters of the person that they want. So even if activists or NLD supporters go go into hiding. They are risking their family members' life because the military is arresting anyone they can find. And so there are two types of arrests going on. So they are targeting individuals like activists, journalists, and NLD members. But at the same time, they are doing mass arrests, especially during the night. There is no internet from 9 o'clock to early in the morning. So during the night, they are doing nightly raids and arresting peaceful protesters if they could find, and any activists that they could find. So there are two types of arrests going on, one targeted and one mass arrest. So that's why, it's been 45 days and we now have more than 2,200 people in prison.
Wai Hnin, could you also respond to the joint statement that was issued by the UN Security Council last week? All 15 members supported the statement, but critics have said that the statement should have been much stronger. And China was among the countries that opposed that stronger language, including calling what's happened, the events, a coup, and possibly blocking punitive sanctions against the military government. Your response to last week's statement?
I would say that, people inside the country are risking their lives. They're going out protesting, and they are calling, all the signs are written in English because they want the international community to help. So when we see statements from the UN Security Council and other international community, it started off being as an encouragement for us. But now, over a month, all these statements mean frustrations rather than encouragement, because we are calling for international community to help because we know that they can, and we are calling them to do targeted sanctions on military companies and global arms embargoes. Of course, China and Russia has always been the problem, but the argument is that China. The reality is China is using its veto power in the UN Security Council because in return they are getting cheap access to the natural resources we have in my country. So they're doing it for their own pocket. And as a country like the US and the UK, you have the power to lead other nations to follow with targeted economic sanctions on military companies. That's why we are calling for international community help, because we know that you can help.
And Russia did back the UN resolution condemning the violence. Is that right, Wai Hnin?
Yes, but of course they know the statement has no sway over the military. They keep issuing statements after statements, or we condemn this violence, we condemn this arrest.
I want to ask you.
Changed.
I want to ask you about that violence, and I want to warn our viewers that we're going to show very graphic violence on the ground, but the level of the violence against the protesters and just who the protesters are, the number of young people who are out in the streets, and also the way the protest is now filtering out through all of society in Burma, the farmers out in rural areas and others, Wai Hnin.
Everyone is coming out on the street because this is not the first time of our struggle for democracy. We have been through that many times before. And this time, people are very adamant that we don't want to live under another military dictatorship. That's why everyone's coming together with different background, people from different ethnic background, religious background, coming together, calling for federal democracy. And of course, if you're cracking down on peaceful protesters, if you want to stop them, there are so many ways to shoot, or there are so many ways to stop peaceful protesters. But what they are actually doing is shooting people in the head, shoot to kill, and it's not stopping the peaceful protest anymore. That's pure killing. And of course, that's why I said a statement has no impact on the military. They know they can get away with it, and they are getting away with it so far. So the violence has escalated every single day.
And the number of people dead? Thousands?
It's over 200 now. We don't know how.
200 dead and thousands arrested.
Yes, and we don't know how many people have died or arrested in a remote area in ethnic state because there is no way of communication or, proper documentation going on in remote area at the moment. So the 200, over 200 and 2,000 people in prison is the figures that we have.
And Wai Hnin, could you also talk about the World Food Program? The UN's World Food Program has warned that the situation in Burma risks pushing poor families into greater hunger. Burma is among the poorest countries in Asia. What do you know about the impact of what's happening on the most vulnerable in the country?
It's getting worse and worse. Of course, we have, it's a very poor country. We don't have any welfare system in the country. And at the same time as the protests, we also have a civil disobedience movement going on, which means civil servants are not going to work. So the military has been pushing to reopen schools, military hospitals, and other banks and other sectors. But the civil servants are saying, no, we are not going back to work. This is our way of protesting against that. As much as it's very encouraging to see that, but what I worry is how sustainable it is for the long term, because the people are very poor in remote area or even in the cities area, and they have very little income coming from their job. And if they stop working first couple of months, even though it's not okay, they might be able to survive. But for the long term and how sustainable it is the worry we have. People will be poorer. There will be more people starving, and the situation doesn't look good.
And before we end, you talked earlier about China's role in this. Chinese factories have been and businesses have been attacked in Burma. And earlier, China had actually been one of the only countries to defend Burma when it was Burma at the UN over its persecution of the Rohingya Muslim community. So could you talk about how China is perceived among the protesters and whether China's position on Burma has changed since the military coup?
China has always been the supporter for the military, and they're also providing technical support for the military in terms of surveillance and other technology. So they are, because they are getting cheap access to natural resources in Burma, and they are doing a lot of investment inside the country. So they are building dams. While doing that, they are they are forcing ethnic people and local people out of their villages. So there are a lot of human rights violations surrounding Chinese investment in the country. So there is the people in Burma don't like those human rights violations. And of course, seeing China vetoing everything that putting forward at the UN Security Council, it angered people inside the country as well. But when it comes to China, there is always an argument that we need to engage with the military because we by the international community is that we can't talk about human rights abuses. It will drive Burma into China's arm. But by not talking about it, you are actually driving Burma into China's arm. So that's why we are asking countries like the US and the UK to base their foreign policy on principle of human rights and democracy and support people inside the country rather than arguing, China is the blockage, because there are so many ways that you can do to help, and China is not the main problem.
As we go out, Wai Hnin, have you had any word from your father and a brief history of him, which really is a history of modern-day Burma?
We have no news about my dad, and we have no communication at all. And the first time he was arrested, it was, I was 5 months old. And when I saw him, I was 4 years old. It was through iron bars. So this is another history repeating inside the country. There are so many children going through what I went through, not knowing when they will see their parents again, and not knowing, who the parent is, growing up without knowing who your parent is. It's the heartbreaking situation, and it's a history repeating itself. So that's why we are very adamant that we don't want to live under another military dictatorship, and we don't want to go through that ever again.
Wai Hnin, very quickly before we end, the question about the China earlier defending Burma at the UN over its persecution of the Rohingya Muslim community.
China has always defended about the human rights violations committed by the military. And of course, although the UN fact-finding mission called the Rohingya genocide as a genocide, the international community have done nothing about it. That's why Mya Aye and his army is thinking they got away with genocide of the Rohingya, so now they can get away with the, staging the coup. So their calculation is that our international response is weak. We can do what we want, and they're doing exactly that on the ground.